All right, so get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into the teenage brain.
Oh, yeah, the teenage brain.
Right, mysterious land of slammed doors and,
Fire rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got this university lecture here on neuroscience and emotional regulation.
It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's not your typical boring lecture. I mean, we're talking about the science behind all those risk-taking behaviors, the emotional outbursts.
Yep.
All
the stuff that makes teenagers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's all about understanding how the adolescent brain actually develops and how it wires itself.
Especially when it comes to managing emotions and making decisions, right?
Yeah.
And this is going to be relevant to you whether you are dealing with teenagers every day,
right,
or just curious about what makes them tick.
Yeah.
So
let's start with the foundation.
Okay.
What's going on in those little brains the first couple of years of life?
Well, in the first 2 years, the focus is on basic survival. So think breathing, heart rate, all that.
Right.
That's controlled by the midbrain and the medulla.
Okay.
Which are pretty well developed at birth.
Mm-hmm.
But the cortex, the outer layer responsible for higher level thinking,
right,
that's just getting started.
So it's all instinct and reflexes for those little ones.
Yeah, basically.
At the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When does the thinking and planning part really start to kick in?
Well, it's gradual, but things really start to ramp up in middle childhood.
Okay.
Between ages 6 and 12.
Okay.
And you'll actually see 2 major growth spurts happening there.
Really?
Yeah. So from ages 6 to 8, it's all about the sensory and motor cortex.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
They're exploring the world.
Through their senses.
They're developing their coordination and motor skills.
Yeah, constantly on the move.
Yeah. Little sponges soaking everything up.
Right.
And then from ages 10 to 12, we see another burst of growth.
Okay.
It's time in the frontal lobes and cerebral cortex.
And that's where the more complex thinking, the planning.
Yeah.
Those executive functions that we'll talk about more.
Ooh, executive function.
Yeah, great.
That's where they really start to take shape.
Is that where things start to go a little haywire in the teenage years?
Well, adolescence is definitely a time of dramatic brain changes.
Yeah.
It's like a major renovation project going on up there.
Yeah.
And we actually see 2 more significant growth spurts during this period.
2 more on top of the 2 we just talked about.
Yep. So the first one between 13 and 15 focuses on spatial perception and motor skills.
Okay.
So this is when teenagers start grasping more abstract concepts and thinking about their own thinking.
So they're not just thinking, they're thinking about how they're thinking.
Yeah. We call that metacognition.
Metacognition.
Yeah. Have you ever had that moment where you're like,
oh, totally.
What was I thinking?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they become more self-aware at this point. Yep.
Then from around 15 onwards, the prefrontal cortex gets its turn for a growth spurt.
Ooh.
Now, this is a big one.
Okay.
The prefrontal cortex is like the CEO of the brain.
Okay.
It's the control center for planning, decision-making, impulse control.
So it's running the show.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of a newbie at it.
Yeah. Like a newbie CEO.
During those teenage years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Figuring things out as it goes.
Still learning the ropes.
Yeah. And this ongoing development of the prefrontal cortex explains a lot about why teenagers can sometimes seem impulsive.
Okay.
Make those questionable decisions.
Right.
Or have those infamous emotional outbursts.
Yeah.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
The prefrontal cortex isn't fully mature, even at 17.
Oh, wow.
It keeps developing well into early adulthood.
So even though teenagers are pushing for more independence, their brains are still very much under construction.
Yeah, basically.
That's got to be tough.
It is.
For them and everyone around them.
Absolutely.
So let's talk more about this executive functioning, because it sounds like it's at the heart of so much of what we see.
Absolutely. Executive functions are like the essential toolkit for navigating life effectively.
Well,
so think of things like inhibiting impulsive behaviors,
right,
planning and organizing, choosing the best course of action, and even managing multiple tasks at once.
Yeah, it's almost like those classic board games that teach kids about planning and strategy.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Like you have to think ahead and consider different options. And control your impulses to win the game.
Exactly. And those skills, those executive functions actually start improving around age 7.
Okay.
But they keep developing throughout adolescence and well into adulthood.
So teenagers are still learning how to use those tools effectively?
Yeah. They're like apprentice CEOs.
Okay.
Still getting the hang of managing their own brain power.
So now for the big question.
Yeah.
Everyone wants answered. Why are teenagers so drawn to risky behavior? Is it all about this developing prefrontal cortex, or is there more to it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that researchers are still exploring.
Okay.
But some believe that the immature prefrontal cortex plays a big role.
Okay.
You wouldn't hand the keys to a Ferrari
No.
to someone who just started driver's ed.
Right.
Yeah.
But not all teenagers engage in the same level of risk-taking.
That's true.
Some are daredevils.
Right.
And some are way more cautious.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
Well, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And it highlights another perspective on teenage risk-taking,
Okay.
what we call the experience argument,
Okay.
which suggests that it's not just about brain structure,
Okay.
but also about a lack of experience with those new adult-like situations that teenagers are facing.
So they're navigating a whole new world without a complete map.
Exactly. And some researchers even propose that certain tendencies towards risk-taking
Okay.
could be rooted in those early life experiences. It's a complex interplay of nature and nurture.
So it's not just like teenagers are just impulsive.
Right.
It's about brain development and their experiences.
It's about how those two factors interact.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So what can we do with this knowledge?
Right.
If we know teenagers are wired for risk-taking, are there ways to guide them towards healthier choices?
Absolutely. There are evidence-based protective factors.
Okay, let's hear it.
That can make a real difference.
What can parents, educators, teenagers themselves do
Right.
to navigate these tricky years?
Well, one of the most important factors
Yeah.
is a parenting style that's both authoritative and understanding.
Okay, so finding that sweet spot between being the boss
Yeah,
and being a supportive guide.
exactly.
I'll be honest, I struggle with that.
I think a lot of parents do. It's
Yeah.
a constant learning process.
Right.
But teenagers still need to know that their actions have consequences,
Mhm.
but they also need to feel loved and understood.
That makes sense. What about the influence of their peers?
Right.
We all know teenagers are heavily influenced by their friends.
Yes, especially when it comes to risk-taking.
If their friends are jumping off a metaphorical cliff, they're more likely to follow.
Yeah, that's unfortunately often the case.
Right.
But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
It's not about locking teenagers away in a bubble
Right.
and preventing them from having any fun.
Yeah.
It's about encouraging healthy risks.
Healthy risks. Okay. I'm intrigued.
What does that look like?
So think about activities that provide thrills and excitement in a safe and controlled environment.
Okay.
Things like rock climbing,
Yeah.
abseiling, other adventure sports.
So channeling that natural desire for risk-taking
Yes.
into something constructive,
Exactly.
but with safety measures in place.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is making me rethink how I approach conversations with my teenager.
Good.
It's not about shutting down that desire for adventure.
Right.
It's about,
Finding ways to support them.
Yeah.
To make smarter choices.
and that's a great segue.
Okay. Into one of the most important takeaways
Right.
from all of this.
Mm-hmm.
The adolescent brain is incredibly adaptable.
It is.
It's constantly changing.
Yes.
Rewiring itself based on their experiences.
Absolutely.
So the teenage years aren't just about surviving until they turn 18.
No.
It's about laying the foundation for a healthy
Yes.
and successful adulthood.
Exactly. And this brings us back to those executive functions
Okay.
we talked about earlier. The development of those skills is essential
Yeah.
for teenagers to make sound judgments, regulate their emotions, navigate all the complexities of life.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good.
The brain development,
Yeah.
the risk-taking,
Yeah.
those executive functions.
Oh, and it all ties together.
Yeah. But before we get into more detail about executive function development, let's take a quick break.
All right. Sounds good.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of the teenage brain.
Definitely.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the teenage brain.
We were talking about those executive functions.
Right.
The CEO skills of the brain.
Yeah.
And how they're still developing throughout the teenage years.
Right. It's like having all the raw ingredients for a delicious meal, but not quite knowing how to put them all together yet.
Think of it like this. A teenager might have the knowledge that staying up late playing video games is going to make them tired and less focused at school the next day.
Right.
But because their prefrontal cortex is still developing, they might struggle to connect that knowledge to their actual behavior and make a different choice.
So it's not necessarily that teenagers don't know what's best for them.
Right.
They just haven't quite mastered the art of applying that knowledge in real life.
And that's where practice comes in.
Okay, so practice makes perfect.
Or at least progress
Right.
when it comes to executive functions.
But what kind of practice are we talking about?
It can be anything that requires planning, organization, decision-making, impulse control. So think about managing a school project, organizing a social event, learning a new skill.
Okay.
Like playing an instrument or coding, even participating in team sports.
So it's not just about lecturing them on making good choices.
Yeah.
It's about giving them real life opportunities to practice those skills.
Exactly, in a supportive environment.
And it's important to remember that failure is a part of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
When teenagers stumble, and they will,
of course,
it's crucial to help them reframe those experiences as opportunities to learn and grow, rather than as personal shortcomings.
That's a good reminder for all of us.
It is.
Sometimes I'm so focused on protecting my teenager from making mistakes that I forget that mistakes are actually a really valuable part of learning.
Yeah, it's a common trap that parents fall into.
Right.
But allowing teenagers to make age-appropriate mistakes in a safe environment can be one of the most powerful ways to help them develop resilience and problem-solving skills.
This whole conversation is making me rethink how I approach these challenges with my teenager.
Good.
Maybe instead of jumping in and trying to fix everything, I should be asking questions like, what are some different ways you could approach this?
Exactly.
Or what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, those are great questions.
Yeah.
To encourage critical thinking and reflection.
Right, because I'm not just trying to teach the right answer.
Right.
I'm trying to help them develop the skills to find their own answers.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Fostering a growth mindset.
Growth mindset. I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
Isn't that about believing that intelligence and abilities aren't fixed?
Yes.
But can be developed?
Exactly, through effort and learning.
So instead of thinking, I'm just not good at math,
right,
they might think, I'm going to work harder and get better at math.
Exactly. And it's not just about academics.
Right.
A growth mindset applies to any area of life, whether it's social skills, artistic talents, athletic abilities.
So it's about helping teenagers understand that their potential is not predetermined.
Yes.
But it's something that they can cultivate and expand through effort.
Yeah.
This is really resonating with me because I think sometimes without realizing it, I've sent the message to my teenager that, certain things come easily to some people and not to others.
But what I'm saying is that everyone has the capacity to learn and grow. It's just about putting in the effort and having the right mindset.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
To send to a young person.
And it's backed by neuroscience.
Okay.
We know that the brain is incredibly plastic.
Yeah.
Meaning it can change and adapt throughout our lives. Every time we learn something new, form a new habit, overcome a challenge, we're literally rewiring our brains.
So our brains are constantly evolving and becoming more complex.
Yes, like those ever-expanding cities you see in time-lapse videos.
And this understanding of brain plasticity underscores the importance of creating environments that support that learning and growth.
Absolutely, whether it's in the classroom at home or in the community.
Yeah.
We need to provide teenagers with the tools, the resources, the encouragement they need to reach their full potential.
It's amazing to think about the potential that lies within every teenage brain.
Yeah.
But it's also a little daunting to realize the responsibility we have as parents, educators, and mentors to help guide them towards making healthy choices.
It's a big responsibility, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one.
Yeah.
And by understanding how the adolescent brain works, we can equip ourselves with the knowledge and strategies to support teenagers during this critical period of development.
So we've talked about the developing prefrontal cortex, the importance of executive functions, and the power of fostering that growth mindset.
Yeah.
Are there any other key insights?
Well, one thing to remember is that while the teenage brain is primed for learning and growth, it's also particularly vulnerable to stress and negative experiences.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, teenagers are dealing with so many changes.
Right.
Both physically and emotional.
Absolutely.
And then you add in academic pressure, social media.
All the complexities of modern life.
It's no wonder they sometimes feel overwhelmed.
Exactly. And this vulnerability to stress is linked to another key characteristic of the teenage brain.
Okay.
It's heightened sensitivity to rewards.
Rewards like getting good grades.
Yeah.
Or praise from their parents.
Those are definitely rewards.
Okay.
But teenagers are also highly attuned to social rewards.
Okay. Like fitting in with their peers.
Yes.
Gaining popularity.
Getting attention on social media.
So it's not just about getting a gold star or a trophy.
Right.
It's about feeling accepted and valued. by their peers.
Precisely. And this heightened sensitivity to rewards can sometimes lead to risk-taking behaviors. As teenagers might be more likely to engage in activities that promise social rewards, even if those activities involve potential negative consequences.
It's like they're willing to take bigger risks for a chance to win the social lottery.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the importance of creating environments that support healthy risk-taking and provide positive outlets for social connection and belonging.
So it's about helping teenagers find ways to satisfy those needs for social rewards in ways that are safe and constructive and aligned with their values.
Exactly. Finding that balance between encouraging exploration and providing appropriate boundaries and guidance.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Good. I'm glad.
I feel like I'm starting to understand the teenage brain in a whole new light.
And we're just scratching the surface.
Right.
The teenage brain is a complex and fascinating frontier.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to explore.
Well, luckily for us, we have a whole third part.
Yes, we do.
Of this deep dive coming up.
That's right.
So stick around, because after a quick message, we're going to tackle some even bigger questions.
Okay.
About the implications of all this for how we approach education, parenting, and even the legal system. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into this amazing world of the teenage brain.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, we've covered so much.
We have.
Those growth spurts.
You have changes happening.
Executive functions.
Yeah, CEO skills.
Fostering that growth mindset.
Exactly.
And, we've been talking about how all this intertwines with the whole teenage experience.
The emotional ups and downs, that drive for connection, and of course,
the risk-taking.
The risk-taking that leaves us adults, wondering what's going on.
And you hinted at some even bigger questions.
Yeah.
Before the break, about how this understanding of the teenage brain should maybe even change the way we approach things like education, parenting, and even the legal system.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Knowing that the prefrontal cortex is still under construction, well into early adulthood, it really challenges some of our traditional approaches.
In education, we often expect teenagers to have that same level of self-regulation and long-term planning as adults.
Yeah, but their brains are literally still developing those skills.
Yeah, it raises all these questions about how we structure learning environments.
Like, think about the traditional lecture format.
Right.
Does it really engage a brain that's wired for exploration and social interaction?
I mean, maybe we should be incorporating more active project-based learning that taps into those natural drives instead of just memorizing facts. Maybe teenagers should be tackling real-world problems, collaborating with their peers.
Exactly.
Making decisions with real consequences.
Yeah, and it's not just about how we teach, but also what we teach. And when we teach it, if the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until early adulthood, does it make sense to introduce really complex decision-making challenges or highly abstract concepts?
Too early.
Too early.
Wow, that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to rethink that whole timeline of what we expect teenagers to master at different stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So education's one big area where this knowledge could have a major impact.
For sure.
What about parenting?
Okay.
We talked about authoritative parenting, encouraging healthy risks. But are there other practical takeaways?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to remember that patience and understanding are key.
I mean, easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
But teenagers aren't deliberately trying to drive us crazy.
Right.
Their brains are simply wired differently than ours.
Knowing that their impulsivity or those emotional outbursts, might be linked to that developing prefrontal cortex could help us respond with a little more empathy.
It could.
Instead of just getting frustrated, we can try to see things from their perspective and help them develop those self-regulation skills.
Exactly. It's not about letting them off the hook for their behavior. It's about understanding the underlying causes and providing the right support and guidance.
What about breaking down complex tasks?
Oh, that's a great one.
Into smaller, more manageable steps.
Yeah.
I'm always telling my teenager to clean their room.
Right.
Which probably feels completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
Maybe I should suggest starting with just like picking up the clothes on the floor.
Exactly.
Then moving on to the next thing.
By scaffolding their efforts, we can help them build their confidence, develop those organizational and planning skills without feeling overwhelmed.
So we've revolutionized education and parenting.
Made some changes.
Now for like the big one, the legal system.
Okay.
How does understanding the adolescent brain impact how we think about accountability consequences for teenagers who break the law.
This is where things get really complex and nuanced. There's a growing body of research that suggests that because the adolescent brain is still developing, particularly in those areas related to judgment and impulse control, teenagers might not be fully capable of understanding the long-term consequences of their actions in the same way that adults are.
So that classic argument of they should have known better might not hold up as strongly when we consider the neuroscience.
It's like saying a toddler should know better than to touch a hot stove, even though they haven't developed the cognitive capacity to understand the danger yet.
So does it make sense to hold teenagers to the same standards of accountability as adults when their brains are still maturing?
It's a big question.
Should the justice system maybe focus more on rehabilitation? Helping teenagers develop those decision-making skills.
Exactly.
Rather than just punishment.
That's a tough one.
And I imagine there's no easy answer.
No.
Right, because you have to consider public safety and victims' rights.
Absolutely.
So it's a delicate balancing act. It's a conversation that requires, careful consideration of multiple perspectives.
A deep understanding.
And a deep understanding of,
the teenage brain.
The teenage brain.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect point to end on this deep dive.
I agree.
Has not only been about understanding the teenage brain, but about challenging our own assumptions. And considering the implications.
Absolutely.
For how we approach everything.
Yeah.
Education, parenting, justice.
It's all connected.
This has been such a fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to continue exploring this,
this complex
and ever-evolving field.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the teenage brain.
It's been a pleasure.
We've learned a lot about those incredible, ever-changing minds.
We have.
I hope you have too.
Me too.
Until next time, keep those brains curious and those conversations open.